Hello and welcome to another edition of AFL Trade Talk. It is going to be a massive episode. We've got a special guest and they're going to be in for the rest of the year. Before I get to him, I'm going to ask my main man Daz. Daz, how are you, mate?
Going well, yeah. Cracking round of comebacks. Obviously Richmond, Collingwood, St Kilda and almost Adelaide on the Sunday. So it hots up the top 8 and top 4 markets.
Yeah, it certainly has. It was a big weekend of footy. It's also a big episode because I'm going to welcome in our friends from Stats Insider, and Todd, Davey is going to be joining us for the rest of the Trade Talk season. And if you don't know who Stats Insider are, they're Australia's leading predictive analytics website and a fantastic site to find back and lay value on the Betfair exchange. But as I welcome in Todd, how are you, mate? Good to see you.
I'm good, Karl. Great to be here, and plenty of exciting stuff to talk about, especially with our AFL futures model. So we'll get into some pretty interesting stuff coming up.
We know you love your footy, and obviously all the Stats Insider guys love their footy, so keen to get your insights into your models. But we're going to kick off reviewing the weekend of footy, and the Port Adelaide and Collingwood game, Daz, was an absolute monster. What a game at Adelaide Oval.
Yeah, it was, and I'm a stats nerd, so really looking forward to chatting to Todd throughout with all of that. But yeah, Collingwood just unbelievably clutch. I haven't seen too many sides better than they are in clutch moments. If you look at that last quarter, I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but they probably had about a dozen inside 50s, but they just kick goals from everywhere. You know that when they get those chances in a tight last quarter, they'll kick goals from 50 out on the boundary, they'll hit targets up under enormous pressure. They just handle those moments. Jamie Elliott's obviously building that reputation as clutch. And whilst Port lose no admirers, I actually think it strengthens Collingwood's grip on the competition to win like that.
Just a quick back or lay question. Don't want the analysis or anything. Back or lay, is Jamie Elliott the most clutch footballer in AFL history?
Maybe not AFL history, so I'll lay, but he's in the conversation. By the end of his career, certainly.
What do you reckon, Todd? Back or lay?
I'm backing that. It's hard to go past Jamie Elliott, especially considering how many times he's sunk teams late in games.
Yeah, Carlton being one of those teams, unfortunately.
I can't actually think of one off the top of my head that would go ahead of him, but yeah, there's probably a couple in the conversation.
The other talking points from that game, it was good to see Zach Butters back in a little bit of form. I know our predictive Brownlow votes had him out of the votes for the last couple of weeks. Connor Rosie's just been magnificent, and it was great to see the old warrior Scott Pendlebury. I reckon he was Collingwood's best on the weekend.
Yeah, someone made an observation that when Collingwood have had those tight wins, even last year after the siren, that I think Pendlebury's been involved in the score chain for all of those late goals. The one this week, certainly the one last year when they beat Essendon after the siren, and then there was another one earlier this year. So he's just a remarkable user of the footy, Scott Pendlebury, and twilight of his career, but he's been sensational.
Let's talk about the Melbourne versus Adelaide game. Adelaide have been a bit off their form. We've seen them jump out of the top 8, but they were magnificent against Melbourne at the MCG. And you know, once again, we saw the big players for Melbourne stand up. Jack Viney with 27 touches. Christian Petrarca's been so good over the last couple of weeks. Did he get into the Brownlow votes though, Daz?
Probably not quite. Obviously, there were some pretty strong performers. His numbers were still pretty good. He had 26 and 5, and you never know. But yeah, Adelaide, I guess the knock on the Crows all year has been their performance on the road. But when they've gone to the MCG, they nearly beat Collingwood a few weeks ago, and then they nearly beat Melbourne coming from 5 goals down in this one. So ultimately, those narrow losses are going to cost them, you would think, on the season. But a very good performance, and they had a couple of chances late to almost pinch that, which would have kept their season alive for sure.
And the other one was Brisbane and Geelong, and obviously the horrible news about Will Ashcroft, which has sent the rising star markets into disarray, and we're going to talk about that later in the show. But what did you make of that game?
Yeah, I think that's why we had him as a sell or a lay at the price, and not that you don't want injuries to players, but you know it's a possibility. And for Will, it's a shocking situation for someone who's been incredible. I mean, he's probably been this year's version of what Nick Dacos was last year, and we obviously know what Dacos has gone on to be. But yeah, Brisbane 10 and zip at the Gabba this year now. Phenomenal record at home, and for them it's a case of just trying to get some home finals, and that's their best passage through to the grand final. And Geelong, you kind of feel like they're going to make it through and participate in the finals, but it's not in the book yet. They just can't quite get consistently their best footy.
Todd, were you watching the Brisbane and Geelong game up at the Gabba on the weekend?
I was, and Brisbane were very impressive. I know they withstood a bit of a late charge from Geelong, but Brisbane's pretty formidable at home, and at Stats Insider, we've got Brisbane at a 48.6% chance to make the grand final, which is the highest of any team in the AFL currently. And that's just by virtue of the fact that they play their home finals up at the Gabba. So they'll be very hard to beat there. But Brisbane, very, very hard to beat up at the Gabba. And it's they're one of the main teams to beat this season.
Yeah, that's really interesting insight. Obviously, I think that's something on the exchange that we're definitely going to have a look at.
And they beat Collingwood by a bit. I think it was 37 points at the Gabba. Like they're the only team to really get hold of them this year. And they beat Melbourne. They were actually thumping Melbourne, and then you had the lights out scenario where the D's actually came back and got pretty close. But they belted both of those teams at the Gabba this year.
Yeah, that's right. While we can't talk about all the other highlights, a couple we need to mention were Charlie Curnow. He was simply stunning on the weekend with 10 goals. I know it was a depleted West Coast backline, which we've seen in many weeks this year, but still, it's still a tough job to kick 10 goals. And obviously the Liam Baker clutch goal and the Richmond comeback against Hawthorn. A couple of massive highlights on the weekend.
Yeah, Richmond and St Kilda were both staring at a cliff, and Richmond got out of danger, and St Kilda got off the hook as well. And yeah, Charlie Curnow, second player to kick 10 this year, both against West Coast. He also kicked 9 against West Coast as well earlier in the year. So it's ugly reading for the Eagles, I think.
We'll take a look at the Coleman medal market later and maybe see if Todd from Stats Insider has anything on the Coleman medal in terms of predictions. We're going to head to the trade talk medal now, and a couple of honourable mentions. Sicily was back to his best after I think that was his second week back after suspension. Luke Parker, Steele, the St Kilda captain, Rosie, Rankin, who unfortunately has gone out with that hamstring injury, and Gawn has been obviously in great form the last couple of weeks. And the final one, Luke Davies-Uniacke, a really interesting one. We were talking about him a lot at the start of the season. He was actually somewhat of a Brownlow contender. I mean, he got as short as about $16 at some stage. But what did you make of their performances?
Yeah, LDU was clearly BOG in a loss and may well get votes in that. But obviously North stopped winning from earlier in the year when they were progressing well. But he was terrific. Jack Steele probably on the basis of the last quarter in dragging the side across the line. Rankin kicked 3 unbelievable goals, particularly the first couple. Max Gawn was pivotal, and yeah, Sicily, one of the better intercept players in the comp, but we ended up settling on, we gave him 3 last week, but still giving some love for the defender, Sam Taylor, just intercepted everything for the Giants. Tossed up between Bontempelli and Curnow for the 2 and the 3. Curnow, obviously, it's very rare that a player kicks 10, but it's against a side that they pummeled. Bontempelli against a fellow finals contender in a big Friday night game, so just weighing those two up, but gone the Bont 2 only because of the rarity of a player kicking 10. So Charlie squeezes the 3.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout, Daz. And we want to hero the defenders and also the forwards that do such a great job. We're going to head to our deep dive now. And this week we're going to talk about St Kilda. They just scraped over the line against North Melbourne, who haven't been in the best form either. It's been a bit of a tale between two halves for the Saints, hasn't it, Daz, this year?
Yes, similar to last year, but different, if that makes sense. Like it's following the same profile and the same path, but different reasons. So St Kilda obviously started the year very well, and there's a few things that have been maintained, and that is their defensive record. So they're ranked second only to Collingwood in terms of scores conceded. Only conceded 100 points once for the year, but conversely, they've only kicked 100 points once for the year. There was an interesting article on the AFL website from, I think it was Riley Beveridge, about how for every good stat or for every bad stat for St Kilda, there is a directly contrasting stat. They've been a really weird side where they would be the best team at stopping teams from scoring once they go inside 50, but conversely, they're the worst team at scoring when they go inside 50. So they're very good at the defensive side of the same stat, but horrible at the offensive side of the same stat. Or number one at scoring from turnovers, but number one at conceding from turnovers and that type of thing. So it's been an inconsistent sort of patchy season for the Saints. But in saying that, there are only 3 teams that have been in the 8 every week of the year. Collingwood, Melbourne and St Kilda are the 3. So
We remember Carlton last year, who were
exactly
who
right.
were in the 8 basically every round of the
Until
year.
the last day,
Until the last day.
Mm.
Let's not talk about that one anymore. But as I said, it was a tale between two halves a little bit for St Kilda. They started off the season really well with 6 wins and 2 losses. Those 2 losses came to Collingwood in an absolutely ripping game. They only lost that game by under a goal and at stages looked like winning. Port also as well, they lost that game by just under a goal and they're 1 and 2 on the ladder and probably your 2 grand finalists there. But since round 15, they've lost to Brisbane. That's fair enough. They're in the top 4. A narrow win versus West Coast, a narrow win versus North Melbourne, and then losses to Melbourne and the Gold Coast. I'm keen to talk about a few different things. Firstly, some of the good players in the first half of the year. Jack Higgins kicked 21 goals in the first 10 rounds, but he's only kicked 7 in his last 9. What do you put that down to, Daz?
Yeah, he's so he missed 2 with the knee, but other than that, he's just lost his way a little bit. I mean, against Hawthorn, probably where the rot started a bit for him, and I think if you look at the small forwards, because Butler's been goalless in the last 3 weeks, that one of St Kilda's main challenges has been, which has often been the case, is turning inside 50s into scores and then converting. So I think one of the other stats was the most intercept marks taken by a player in a game is 10 ever, or thereabouts. I think St Kilda gave up 9 to Harris Andrews, 8 to Stephen May. So I'm teetering on that record every week. So if you look at St Kilda, when they've gone forward, have been kicking it to intercept markers. Even Ben Mackay for North on the weekend took plenty. So if you're a crummer in Higgins or Butler, the ball's not hitting the ground because they're kicking it straight to these tools. You haven't got Max King obviously making a contest. And the other forwards are quite young. Caminiti's 18, Filippo's 18, Owens is 19, albeit a jet. So that's why I think it's slightly different. St Kilda have had problems going forward probably since Nick Riewoldt retired in many respects. But I think this year, their forward line woes are the fact that they're getting carried by 3 kids without Max in that lineup. And then you combine that with the fact that their midfield aren't super users of the ball. So they've got young, inexperienced forwards and then probably a lack of confident ball use through the middle. And I think that's probably starving the Smalls.
So talking about the forward line, I mean, I just want to throw this stat to you. Mason Wood and Brad Crouch are leading goal assists at St Kilda with 15 and 10, which is already way too low. But I probably have to question those 2 players in being the leading goal assist players at St Kilda. Probably not the 2 players that you want leading your goal assist. So clearly there's a bit of a gap for a player there, that potentially a playmaker across half forward. Really, we thought that player would be Jack Billings. Am I right there?
Yeah. He's obviously been injured a bit this year, but when he plays again, probably ball use not what they would like. And Jade Gresham, certainly another example of that, where he's been a very good clearance player, very good around goal, but ball use forward has been iffy. So St Kilda, if you look at their profile, they're very good between the arcs at moving the ball, one of the better sides at going from defence to attack. But once they get to about 60, they're one of the poorer sides in the competition. So, and if you look at their year overall in that space, so they're 12th for inside 50s, but 2nd for contested possessions. So they're winning the contest, but not turning that into attacking movements. 15th for points scored, but 2nd for points conceded. So very good defensively, very poor offensively. And I guess if you look at their year now at 10 and 8, hovering in the 8, favourites against Hawthorn, but that's probably 50-50 on form. If they find a way past that game, they've just got to win one of those Richmond and Carlton games, because I think based on percentage, 12 wins gets them in. So there's still a chance. I know there's a lot of negativity around them based on form, and absolutely on form they'd be the 16th best team in the competition. But if they can find a way through 1 or 2 results, then they can still turn this into a finals year.
I just want to read out a couple of standout players. There's no surprises that Mitch Owens is having a fantastic year. Jack Sinclair's elevated on his best and fairest year last year. Wanganang Millera, I think you've noted him the last couple of weeks. He's having a fantastic month or 2 when St Kilda aren't playing that well. The one I want to talk about is Rowan Marshall. We've also spoken about him. Look, he's leading hit-outs with 495 hit-outs, but the next best is 45, and that's Mitch Owens. So clearly there's just a massive gap, or a few massive gaps around the ground for St Kilda. They're obviously missing some sort of defensive forward and some craft to get the goal assist. I think a second ruckman is needed desperately there. And I'd be calling Brodie Grundy and Sean Darcy's management at St Kilda in the off-season, especially if I was Ross Lyon. And I want to throw this question to you, Daz. How do you feel about Rowan Marshall potentially being almost like a Mark Blitzarv's hybrid midfielder? Because he's coming second at St Kilda for clearances and second for contested possessions. And I think if you got a big ruckman in to help shoulder some of that load, imagine how beastly that midfield would look if you had Rowan Marshall in the middle of it with a big ruckman.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at the win over North, they were really struggling to penetrate. So they put, at three-quarter time, Marshall went forward, took 2 contested marks inside 50, and Owens went into the ruck. And Owens has been a bit of a stopgap where he'd either play second ruck, centre-half forward, go into the middle and throw his body around a little bit. So Owens in the ruck, Marshall forward, kind of swung the game a little bit their way. So I'd be tempted if I was St Kilda in the meantime, certainly go after Grundy and the like in the off-season, but they've got, say, Tom Campbell on their list or young Max Heath. Until Max King comes back, I just wonder whether you pick a second ruckman like Tom Campbell and say, Marshall, you're going to spend 10 minutes a quarter forward, ruck the rest of the time, and then we'll give you another big body in there just so St Kilda has a bit more of a structure in front of the ball, which can potentially help them compete.
Yep. Don't mind that at all, Daz. Well, currently on the Betfair Exchange, St Kilda at $2.74, but I'm super keen to hear from Todd from Stats Insider. Where do you guys see St Kilda finishing in 2023?
So currently St Kilda is ranked below 2 teams that aren't even inside the 8. So that's Richmond at 33.6%. and Carlton at 63.5. While they occupy that 6th position, St Kilda is behind 2 teams that aren't even in the 8. So our scheduled difficulty assessor, which you can find at statsinsider.com.au, has St Kilda with the 2nd worst fixture for the remainder of the season. So they'll go up against Hawthorn, which they will potentially go in as favourites, but then they face Carlton, Richmond, face last year's premiers Geelong, and then Brisbane at the Gabba, which we already spoke about as being one of the toughest fixtures in all of AFL. So on current form, they're only going to go in as favourites in one of those games, and it makes it really tough. So as Daz mentioned, they will need to win one of those games against Carlton and Richmond, which they will go in as outsiders in. But we currently have them missing the 8, so we're laying St Kilda to make the finals this year.
Yeah, I think certainly on that. So the Hawthorn game, they lost the Hawthorn game earlier in the year, so obviously no guarantees that they get through that, and you probably put a line through them if they lose that. But if they find a way to win that, I guess the thing in their favour is that they are in control of their destiny and that they play those 2 teams, Carlton and Richmond, who'll be trying to take a spot off them. So probably only need to beat one of them, I think, based on percentage, if you look at teams around them like Essendon and the Giants and their percentage as well. So a long way off, obviously being confident in that. I guess the thing in their favour is that Richmond historically don't play Marvel all that well. But they're going to need a significant improvement in form to get that, and they're going to want to have their top 8 spots secured before that last fortnight with Geelong and Brisbane to come.
Well, it's going to be a tough remaining few weeks for St Kilda for the 2023 season. We're going to head to our Brownlow predictions segment, and we're going to have a look at some of the ladder predictions for the rest of the year as well from Stats Insider. But first, the Brownlow. Nick Dacos there, still rock solid, 30 predicted votes. Following after is Christian Petrarca, 25. Marcus Bontempelli, 23 predicted votes. Tim Taranto back in the votes again, 22.5, and then equal as well. Lachie Neale, who hasn't had a predicted vote in his last 2 weeks, but didn't have the worst game on the weekend. Daz, anything that you want to take a look at there?
Yeah, Lachie Neale's always fascinating. He just bounces like no other player does. I mean, he was, I think, 14s last week, not predicted to get a vote, so jumps to 25. We don't see any other player move that dramatically week to week, which is interesting. Obviously, Taranto, Bontempelli and Rosie were the 3 that moved a bit. Bontempelli, excellent on Friday night. Be stunned if he doesn't get 3 in that. Rosie, likely votes. Obviously, they lost, albeit narrowly, and Taranto helped drag Richmond across the line. He's predicted to get 1.5, but could get 3. Certainly could get 3 in that. So, it's hard to run down Dacos. I mean, that was a chance for Petrarca with Dacos not getting predicted votes that Petrarca could have closed that gap, but likewise not predicted to get votes. But I'm always just fascinated that it's like Lachie Neale plays well. He'll go from 25s into 10s. Yep. Then there's a game where he's not expected to get a vote and bounces back out to 25 again. So
unbelievable that Zach Butters touched into $4 this year and is now out to $22 on the Betfair Exchange. And now Connor Rosie has overtaken with predicted votes, but he's still $40 on the exchange. So
and it's quite remarkable when you look at liquidity, because Zach Butters predicted to be 17 votes is at $22. Stephen Coniglio predicted to be 16.5 votes is nearly $800 to win the Brownlow. So potentially level on votes.
I think there's a fair bit of laying that's going to be happening now. Maybe Marcus Bontempelli, I probably said a couple of weeks ago that I don't see him being a chance, but I'm still going to leave the Brownlow down to 3. Nick Dacos and Christian Petrarca, the easy two ones that I'm keen on. But then probably Lachie Neale in 3rd. I just don't want to jump off him. I think with their run home, he's certainly a chance to continue to stay in the votes. Are you sort of similar, Daz?
Yeah, I'm sort of similar to I guess what the strategy's been a lot of the way through in that space. So I still think prohibitive at the top. So yeah, you're looking around that mark.
Well, we're going to head to our buy, hold and sell segment here. And Daz, I'm going to let you kick it off. You bought the pies last week for the flag. They're still unbeatable.
Surely. I think so. I'm buying them again. Their price hasn't moved, so they're still, I think, a little bit overs. Now, it's a funny thing to say because they win a lot of close games. And if you're playing close games, you open yourself up to either bad luck or individual brilliance. Like you play Melbourne and you're 7 points up and Petrarca wins 2 huge clearances and you lose. Not through necessarily doing anything wrong. But I just think their ability to answer challenges home and away, I still think, if they get Brisbane in a grand final at the MCG, they get Port Adelaide in a grand final at the MCG, even Melbourne with their scoring problems, other sides just aren't chugging along enough, like the Bulldogs or Geelong. I think Collingwood should be as short a team, should be as short as any team to win the flag since Essendon in 2000, I think. Yeah. I'm not saying they're morals, but Essendon in 2000 were streets ahead of the pack. I think Collingwood are almost in that sort of territory.
Currently $2.82 on the Betfair exchange. Look, price is a really interesting thing because you can sometimes be $1.10 but be value. So I'm really interested to hear from Todd from Stats Insider, just to see where they rate Collingwood as the premiership winner so far.
So we have Collingwood at the top at 26.5%. So they've been pretty consistently strong throughout the year as our premiership favourites, but we got Brisbane hot on their tail at 25.1%. And again, that touches back to Brisbane's home ground advantage when the finals roll around. So if things fall into place for Brisbane and they play at the Gabba for their qualifying final and preliminary final, it's almost a clean passage through. So that's why we've got them so close to Collingwood. And then we go down to Port Adelaide at 17.4%. So the Pies and Brisbane are really kind of not necessarily head and shoulders above the pack, but they look to be the 2 picks for our futures model currently. And that's probably about where Collingwood should be at 26.5%. As Daz mentioned, they do look like the team to beat.
The danger I would have for Collingwood, the only danger would be, and I said I'm very strong on them winning the flag, would be that Melbourne are likely to finish 4th, which means that Collingwood's first final would be a neutral final in inverted commas against the D's, and Melbourne have beaten them once this year. So if Collingwood somehow dropped that game, had a bad day and lost, it would mean they'd have to win a preliminary final in either Brisbane or Adelaide to make it, which is the hardest passage for them. If they make the grand final, they win the grand final, I think. The challenge would be getting there. Just
one more question to Todd without notice, apologies, but does Stats Insider have Brisbane potentially finishing ahead of Port Adelaide by season's end?
So we have Collingwood at 90.5% to win the minor premiership, and that was after they beat Port Adelaide as underdogs in that game. But next best is Brisbane, and you see the big gap here. It's 6.3% to win the minor premiership, and then Port Adelaide is half that at 3.1%. So we've got Brisbane. While they're not a genuine chance to win that minor premiership, they've got a better opportunity to do it than Port Adelaide, and that's pretty reflective of how the season's played out so far.
Geez, I think we found our buy from Todd here, because I'm looking at the Betfair exchange and Brisbane are currently $2.80 to be the top non-Victorian team. Port Adelaide are $1.35, so we've got to buy and sell there definitely.
I think Brisbane would already be second had they not have lost that Melbourne game pretty much on the bell last week.
Yep, that's a good call. This week, I'm going to buy Adelaide and to a lesser extent Hawthorn. Adelaide play their second showdown against Port Adelaide. I just think Adelaide at $3 on the Betfair exchange a pretty good odds for a team that has jumped back into form. Obviously, as you said, they had to go to the MCG where they've played some good footy to play Melbourne, who are slowly coming back into form as well. But they're coming against Port, who are coming off potentially a deflating loss against the Pies. So I thought Port's form prior to their loss to Collingwood was a bit patchy. And I think these odds should be a lot closer to even. So we know that Adelaide beat them early in the year.
Convincingly,
didn't they? So I think anything can happen in that showdown. And then when Adelaide's $3+ I'll probably see a little bit of value there.
Yeah, you almost frame showdowns as 50-50 given the rivalry. It's sometimes we'd say West Coast and Fremantle, the dominant side just dominates the matchup, whereas Adelaide Port, it seems to be very different. It's almost a flip of the coin each time they play.
Speaking of flip of the coin, I'm curious to hear from Todd. Have you got any predictions for that upcoming showdown this week?
Yeah, so we've run 10,000 simulations on that showdown, and we're giving the Crows only a 26% chance of winning that game. So the model was really favouring Port Adelaide in this one, and as you guys mentioned, it sometimes can be a flip of the coin, but the numbers are telling us that Port Adelaide are a much higher chance of winning this game.
Geez, I'm taking on the Stats Insider model here. I don't know how I'm going to go. Probably not as good, but we'll talk about it next week nevertheless. All right, Daz, who are you holding on this week?
I think they'll make it, but Geelong, if you look at the top 8 odds compared to a lot of other sides, only because, they've got the draw in their favour, but 9, 8 and 1 at the moment. They should beat Fremantle this week, which means they'll probably shorten a fraction. But then after that, they've got, admittedly, home games, but Port Adelaide, tricky. They've got Collingwood, which is a tricky game. Then they've got home fixtures against teams like the Bulldogs. They've got St Kilda at Marvel. So I can't find, apart from this week against Fremantle, I don't think there's a lock in that last 4. Mm-hmm. So I think they'll do enough to win them, but they're not absolutely across the line yet. So I'd be waiting because they'll win this week and shorten again, I would think.
I've got a really interesting hold for you, Daz, because I'm actually going against your sell. I think we're going a little bit head-to-head here. I'm holding on Will Ashcroft for the Rising Star because just because he's injured, he's done his ACL, he's obviously going to take no more further part in this season. I think he's still got to be a chance for the medal. We've obviously seen him drift, but there have been instances where players that haven't played a full season have still gone on to win the medal. Maybe not Chris Scott after 19 games, but he won the medal after missing a couple. Nick Holland won the medal after only playing 15 games. And then most recently was Caleb Sarong. He won the medal after only playing 14 games. So I still think there's a chance. Look, if you wanted to minimise your risk and lay off, I can completely understand there. And I'm surprised you're probably still getting a price to do that. I would have expected Will Ashcroft to drift a lot more. Yeah. If he did, I'd actually potentially look at backing him. He's probably a little bit too short now, so that's why I'm just holding for the minute.
It's interesting the market watch over the weekend. So Ashcroft was $1.55 before that game, and then as soon as he got injured, Sheasel came into about $1.50 and Ashcroft out to where he is now, about $2.30. Then Mitch Owens came into 3s on Sunday with his important role in the victory. Owens back out to 4.10. And Sheasel eased a bit, 150 out to 160. So I just think, and you're right, Ashcroft's been super. I think it's one of the tighter races though, and I just look at the run home. Sheasel's not slowing down. He's still getting his 30 every week. And Mitch Owens, it's probably an if, but if St Kilda find a way to scrounge their way into the 8, I think he's going to play a role in that. And I think that if he produces 1 or 2 sort of semi-match winning performances, then he'd almost be favourite.
They do look at the year holistically though. Yeah. So unless Sheasel can lift his averages up by 5 or 6, it's really not going to change in the last few rounds of the year. They're going to look at the averages across everyone, and I know that these pundits love to look at stats, and I think out of all of them, Will's stats are very impressive.
Do you think the market will change every week, or do you think it'll hover? Do you think if this week North plays West Coast, if Sheasel gets 35 again, or if Mitch kicks 3 against Hawthorn, do you think we'll see significant movement, or it'll hold this sort of line?
No, I think we always do, because the market's always reactive when things happen. Sheasel might come out and be the youngest player ever to get 45 touches in a game. But that shouldn't change the rising star race. It really shouldn't. And that's why I think the injury to Will Ashcroft really shouldn't change what should be the outcome. He was the short price favourite, touched $1.40. I think probably there was value around other players, but yeah, I would have to say that Will Ashcroft is still, even though he's injured, should be the favourite.
It's incredibly unfortunate, obviously, to see a young player with that much potential get an injury like that. It's very sad for him, and who knows? I mean, it could potentially rob him of a debut year premiership, conceivably, the way Brisbane have been travelling.
Let's not talk about that, Daz. That negativity puts
It's
shivers
really
up my
sad,
spine.
yeah.
It's sad. Let's go to your sell, mate. What's your sell this week?
So my sell was, I just think he's going to drift out a little bit. So you're going to get a better lay price now, if you will. For mine, I just get the feeling that those other two, with 5 games to go, are probably going to do enough to tip past him.
Well, I'm just going to be really quick on my sell of St Kilda. I think the Stats Insider model has shown, and Todd has said that St Kilda are a really tough chance to make the top 8, and they're still pretty short. So I'm going to sell them, lay them for the top 8. The one I really want to talk about actually is Carlton. I know that they're in red hot form. They're on a winning streak. Carlton do, however, run into the Pies this week, and they're by far the best team in the comp, the Pies. I know there's a lot of hype coming into this game, a lot of emotion given it's a Carlton-Collingwood clash, but we need to be realistic about this, as Carlton don't have the best record against Collingwood in recent times, and the way Collingwood play, they break hearts, and Carlton love getting their heart broken. So I think no matter what happens, whether Carlton lose by 1 point or 50 points, I think they're going to drift slightly in the top 8 market. Then Carlton could get back to their winning ways, and I'll probably look at buying in a couple of weeks. But I'm keen to hear from Todd about Carlton's top 8 chances for the rest of the year.
So there's 63.5% chance of making the finals. So that's better than GWS, who's currently in the 8, and St Kilda. So the model's very confident, and it has been for the last month. So our model was pretty confident back when they were paying $4 on the exchange, and they continue to recommend Carlton all the way through. So heading into round 20, you're still getting a 10%, better than 10% edge on the Blues to make the finals with our model based on the price that's on the exchange. And even with the potential loss against Collingwood this week with that 26% winning probability, our model still favours Carlton to make the finals this season.
I was going to say, if you look at the numbers, I mean, we could do a deep dive into the run home for sides potentially, but Carlton, I think that either, because we've got one extra game this year, it's a 23-game season, not 22. So 13 and 10 will get sides in, or if you've got a draw, I think 12, 10 and 1. So you look at Carlton, Richmond, Sydney, Geelong that have all got the draw, and then St Kilda, Essendon, Giants, Bulldogs, etc. that don't. But for Carlton, if you look, the 2 games I'll start underdogs, this one against Collingwood and then probably Melbourne at the MCG, but could win either of them conceivably. And then those other games are St Kilda, they've got the Gold Coast at Metricon and the Giants at Marvel. So no easy games in those, but they probably have to win those 3 and they'll get in if they don't win the other 2. So it's fascinating if you look at the key games for every side. We could do almost an episode on that.
Absolutely amazing how this season has turned out and how close all the teams in the competition are. It's, I don't know whether it's a credit to the AFL. I don't know what's happening, but yeah, the competition is extremely close. We're going to head to our betting strategies for the weekend. I'm probably going to have a couple of dollars on Adelaide. I think at $3 plus their value. And then on a lesser extent, I'll probably also back Hawthorn a little bit. I think that they can be closer in price there. Christian Petrarca, another one. I think his price has been rock solid for the Brownlow. I probably see him getting votes in a couple of games where the Betfair predictions model hasn't seen him get votes. So I don't think he's actually as far away from Nick Dacos as what our model has said. But who are you backing this week? All laying, Daz?
Yeah, Betfair's got a couple of little parlay options that they've thrown up, little multis for end of season things. So I think there's a couple that are likely. So Pies Premiership, obviously very keen on that. Kerno's probably got the Coleman wrapped up. So then you could look at, there's a lot that offer that, and then you could throw one of the others in there if you wanted a bit of value. So if you wanted to go with a favourite and it's Dacos for the Brownlow, if you wanted to go with Petrarca for a bit more odds, you can go with Ashcroft for the Rising Star, or you could look for some value and go with Owens or something like that. So yeah, I'd be anchoring Collingwood and Charlie Curnow in those, and then just deciding what you want to do with the others.
Todd, has Stats Insider got any potential good value plays that we can look at towards the weekend, or maybe something in the futures markets?
Yeah, so we'll put our best bets up on statsinsider.com.au once teams drop later in the week. But as of now, we've got a 7% edge on the Suns in that Q clash against Brisbane. So we're thinking that as compared to the exchange, we're thinking that 7% edge is a pretty strong one heading into the weekend. That may change once teams drop and once there's a little bit more liquidity in the market, but as of now, a 7% edge on the Suns.
Yeah, interesting. And you never know what happens in those contests, whether it's a derby or a showdown, or we always miss the what's this, the Battle of the Bridge.
Yeah, the Battle of the Bridge and the Q clash.
And the Q clash, that's it. Fantastic episode. It was absolutely awesome to have Stats Insider and Todd here for their first episode. They'll be sticking around for the rest of the year, but that's all we've got time for on this bumper edition of AFL Trade Talk. For all our trading strategies, make sure you head to the Betfair Hub now.
What's gambling really costing you? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.